Tonight, showdown on the Texas border. President Biden and former President Trump face off at the epicenter of the immigration crisis. Plus,
again, we did not handle this right, and I did not handle it right.
Defense Secretary Lloyd grilled on Capitol Hill today, why he kept his recent hospitalization a secret from the nation. And
be fair and be on the side of right.
Race and the ballot box, how redistricting can shape the outcome of the November elections. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. A deadly day in Gaza leaves the world with questions. Good evening in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. The distribution of humanitarian aid took a lethal turn today as civilians in the Gaza Strip rushed a convoy of trucks. Details are still emerging, but in response to the sudden stampede, there are reports of more than 100 people dead. Hamas blames the IDF for opening fire on civilians seeking help. In a statement, the Israeli military says the crowd posed a threat and that shots were fired. But the majority of deaths came as people were run over by aid vehicles and from gunmen who used their guns while looting supplies. While officials from around the world look into what happened, the head of the United States Agency for International Development says civilian lives must be a top priority.
I know investigations are underway to find out exactly, again, what happened today. But again, a core principle that applies everywhere USAID and our partners work around the world is that desperate civilians trying to feed their starving families should not be shot at. Getting more humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza and making sure humanitarian workers can safely deliver it, as we saw today, is really a matter of life and death.
As the situation was playing out for the Palestinian civilians in Israel, the nation's war cabinet met for ongoing hostage and ceasefire talks. The U.S. has been working to help facilitate those negotiations. President Biden says today's situation in Gaza makes them more complicated. To the U.S. southern border. Tonight, both President Biden and former President Trump are there, both blaming each other for the growing crisis. White House correspondent Abigail Robertson joins us now with more on their dueling border visits. Abigail, both men highlighting an important issue for voters in November.
That's right, Jenna. A recent Harvard poll showed immigration has actually overtaken inflation as the top policy concern for voters right now. Americans across the country are feeling the effects of the influx in migrants coming across the border, including in New York City, where Mayor Eric Adams is calling for drastic changes to the Big Apple's sanctuary city policies. CBN News senior national affairs correspondent Heather Sells is on the ground in Texas, where locals have been dealing with the crisis for years.
People here in town are telling us that they are weary of the border crisis. It is literally draining city resources, and people here are ready for new policies that will deter migrants from making dangerous attempts to cross the river.
Today, Trump visited Eagle Pass, Texas, which is the epicenter of a legal feud between Texas and the Biden administration, while President Biden was about 300 miles away in Brownsville.
What solutions are both men putting forward?
Well, President Biden is reportedly considering taking executive action to restrict migrants' ability to seek asylum, and he's criticizing Republicans for not supporting the bipartisan bill a few weeks ago and highlighting the fact Trump played a key role in killing that bill. Now, Trump has made Biden's handling of the border a central issue for his campaign and claims the situation is Biden's crisis. And Trump's promising, if reelected, he'll expand on the immigration crackdowns and policies he started during his first term. Now, House Speaker Mike Johnson painted this picture of the dueling border visits today.
The side-by-side image of these two presidents could not be a greater contrast. One president was building a wall, President Trump. He was cracking down on those trying to cross the border illegally. He was supporting our CBP agents. He used his executive authority to stop illegal immigration. And the current president, Biden, is doing exactly the opposite of all those things. He stopped construction on the wall. He halted deportations. He ceded operational control to the cartels and the traffickers. and he did everything he could to incentivize illegal immigration. Long story short, one president showed strength and the other showed weakness. I mean, that's just what it is.
And Johnson is also criticizing the fact that this is only Biden's second visit to the border as president. Jenna?
All right, Abigail Robertson, thank you very much. Well, as lawmakers tackle immigration policy, the faith community is working to bring help and hope to the people caught up in the chaos. Evangelist Franklin Graham shared the good news of the gospel last night. You can see here the fourth stop on his 10-city God Loves You border tour. The tour just one of many ministries working in the area.
God is doing a big revival right now in my community and other border cities, and I feel and I believe and I have faith that this revival is just not going to end here in the borders.
And World Relief is among the Christian organizations on the border. Matt Sorens is Vice President of Advocacy and Policy and joins us now. Matt, welcome. So last time we talked, you were down on the border hosting evangelical leaders. Give us an update on the work all of you are doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen from evangelical leaders, both those who visited the border and those just trying to track what's happening from a distance, that evangelical Christians really want to see changes at the U.S.-Mexico border. In fact, we just released a poll from Lifeway Research yesterday that found that 90+% of evangelical Christians say that it should be a priority for immigration policy to ensure that we have secure borders. In fact, 77% of evangelical Christians said it's important that Congress take that action this year. And I think that is important. It's, there's things the president can do, whether this president or the former one or a future one. But actually, a lot of the challenges at the border are tied to public policies that are laws that were passed by Congress in the past. Maybe at a time they made more sense, but that would need to be revised by Congress to fundamentally change the situation.
Yeah. What kinds of things would World Relief like to see put in place, Matt?
Yeah, we would love to see a more functional, orderly process at the border. So it should be, it should be very, very difficult to come into the border, crossing the border unlawfully. And yet at the same time, we want to make sure there are robust processes so that those who are fleeing persecution, whether for their faith or some other reason, have that opportunity to seek asylum under the terms of U.S. law. So those are sort of our two riverbanks of how do we ensure that we have secure borders that keep out those seeking to do harm, and that we have fair and just processes for those fleeing from persecution. And at the same time, there's a lot of other priorities around immigration. Things like dreamers, the immigrants who were brought, in most cases, decades ago at this point, to this country, who are waiting upon court decisions to see if they'll be allowed to stay lawfully. And one of the things that we found in this survey from Lifeway Research was that the large majority of evangelical Christians, 4 out of 5, said they would support legislative solutions where Republicans and Democrats would come together for solutions that would improve border security, would provide a path to citizenship for those dreamers, and then it would also look at our visa system, especially as it relates to agriculture. There's a huge challenge with actually labor shortages in agriculture in the United States, and American Christians want there to be legal processes for people to come and fill those jobs.
Yeah. Matt, for viewers at home, how can Christians be a part of the solution here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're called to be in prayer for our members of Congress. We're told to pray for kings and all those in authority, so we should be certainly doing that. I also think, reaching out to our elected officials and telling them the status quo is clearly unacceptable, but also whether or not Congress does what I think is their jobs in terms of fixing the public policy issues, there are ways that local churches can be a part of meeting needs for newly arrived immigrants. That's true at the border and in places like Eagle Pass and Brownsville and San Diego and, all across the U.S.-Mexico border. World Relief works with some of those partners. And there's also, though, migrants showing up in communities, and churches are stepping up to meet human needs in really tangible ways, and at the same time proclaiming the hope of the gospel as well. Some of these folks are already vibrant Christians, and that's exciting. Others of them will be encountering the hope of the gospel for the first time as they interact with Christians in the United States.
All right, Matt Sorens with World Relief. Matt, good to see you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, happy to be here.
All right, in Alabama, lawmakers are rushing to pass legislation to protect in vitro fertilization. Today, the state House overwhelmingly passed a measure to protect the treatment. The Alabama State Supreme Court recently ruled that embryos are children, causing some clinics in the state to halt IVF treatments, fearing repercussions if something goes wrong. Today's measure, and a similar one in the state Senate, would ease up prosecution. Alabama Governor Kay Ivey says she wants to protect IVF. Legislation is expected on her desk early next week. Well, coming up, a secret hospitalization put him in the hot seat. How the defense secretary defended his actions today on Capitol Hill. Welcome back. A breakdown in notifications. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin says that's why the White House wasn't immediately informed of his hospitalization last month. Appearing before a House committee today, the secretary took full responsibility for the communication failure. National security correspondent Caitlin Burke is following the story. Caitlin?
Jenna, under heavy questioning, Secretary Austin stressed that although communicating his hospital stay was handled incorrectly, no lapse in authority ever occurred.
At all times, either I or the Deputy Secretary was in a position to conduct the duties of my office.
Austin admitted he should have told his team, Congress, and the American people about his cancer and subsequent treatment when he learned of the diagnosis in December. The secretary denied any accusations of intentionally keeping his January hospitalization secret.
We did not handle this right, and I did not handle it right. As you know, I've apologized, including directly to the president, and I take full responsibility.
An internal Pentagon review found the breakdown occurred because Austin's staff worried about medical privacy and was unsure of proper protocol for a rapidly changing situation. Austin told lawmakers Thursday new systems are now in place to eliminate any future confusion over protocol.
We had the opportunity to put those procedures in play when I went back to the hospital on February 11th, and it was there was timely notification in a seamless fashion.
Still, House Republicans maintain the incident made the U.S. look weak and caused a national security risk.
Wars were raging in Ukraine and Israel. Our ships were under fire in the Red Sea, and our bases were bracing for attack in Syria and Iraq. But the Commander-in-Chief did not know that his Secretary of Defense was out of action.
While Democrats agree the lack of transparency must not be repeated, they sought to move attention from Austin to the failure of Congress to pass a defense budget.
We're now 5 months late in the appropriation process. It is the responsibility of the Congress to provide the appropriations, and we are not doing so. We're on our 4th or 5th continuing resolution. We are derelict. Not you, sir.
Representative John Garamendi warned colleagues the Pentagon can't meet national security needs if the House doesn't do its job.
Humanitarian aid, Israel, the replenishment of our arsenals, all are at risk because this House has refused to take action.
A report from the Defense Department Inspector General into the handling of Austin's hospitalization is expected in the next several months. Jenna?
Caitlin, we know there's a procedure now in place. This doesn't happen again, but is there also concern his health could further sideline Secretary Austin in the future?
Well, the secretary said his cancer was caught early and his doctors are confident he'll make a full recovery. He also mentioned that even when hospitalized, he's generally able to continue fulfilling his duties. The secretary's cancer diagnosis has given him a unique opportunity to highlight the importance of screening for prostate cancer. 1 in 8 men are diagnosed with the disease, but the rate is higher among Black men, with 1 in 6 expected to face prostate cancer in their lifetime. Jenna?
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. Well, the role of race in redistricting and the national ramifications this presidential election year. That and more when Faith Nation returns. Does former President Trump have immunity from federal charges based on actions he took in office? The Supreme Court will decide. Trump's legal team argues he can't face criminal prosecution for his involvement in the January 6th Capitol riot or actions taken while president. An appeals court disagreed. Now the High Court will weigh in. Justices will hear arguments the week of April 22nd. A decision is expected by the end of June. Meanwhile, the former president won't be on the primary ballot in Illinois, according to a new ruling from a Cook County judge. The GOP frontrunner will be removed over, quote, engaging in insurrection on January 6th. Mr. Trump says he will appeal, and while that appeal is pending, his name remains on the ballot. Illinois is the third state to say the Capitol riot made the former president ineligible to hold the office again. In other election news, come November, every seat in the U.S. House of Representatives will be up for grabs. And this year, voters in Alabama will play a key role in determining which party controls the lower chamber. It's one of several states where redistricting could have national implications. But some black voters in Alabama say their votes won't matter after the state legislature refused a federal order to draw a second majority black district. Hillary Powell reports.
At Heritage Barbershop in Montgomery, Alabama, like the name says,
this whole United States changed on the backs of Montgomery. It's the history point of making America who America was and what it is now.
Owner Vladimir "Boo Man" Averett makes sure to sprinkle the city's civil rights legacy between each cut.
Montgomery started it from Dr. King, Rosa Parks, and it's time for us to continue that movement on, to change, to help assist in changing America.
Change that the Supreme Court stepped in to ensure would make voting more fair for Averett and all Alabama African Americans. That's because Montgomery sits in the state's new congressional district that intentionally includes a population of nearly 49% black voters.
I recognize that we come from a state who hasn't been kind to black people in particularly, and it's been like a constant trial after trial.
In 2021, Kadita Stone sued the state of Alabama, alleging the state's congressional map illegally diluted black voting power. A page at the Alabama House since age 15, she felt betrayed that legislators would be accused of racial gerrymandering.
How does it hit you that the people who were walking those halls were the ones who also decided to incorrectly draw this map?
I feel like it was a huge slap in the face for them to just disenfranchise a group of people who were just asking for a fair fight.
The last straw came in November 2021 when the legislature drew the state's congressional map with only one majority black district, despite black residents making up more than a quarter of the state's population. That led Stone and other residents to sue the Alabama Secretary of State. In January 2022, a three-judge panel, including 2 appointees by former President Donald Trump, ordered Alabama's legislature to redraw the map to include 2 majority or near majority black districts. The state then appealed to the Supreme Court. More than a year later, in June 2023, the Supreme Court affirmed the district court's ruling, holding the Alabama map likely violated the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
It was disappointing, and then the fact that Alabama became a spectacle to the nation and the world, that we just cannot even listen to the Supreme Court.
Reverend Alan Sims Sr. leads the church where Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. served as pastor when he helped organize the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott. In a sanctuary that's seen its share of struggle, Sims says justice was served when the district court stepped in once more to order a special master redraw state maps for the 2024 elections.
Be fair and be on the side of right.
Montgomery has always been central to freedom's fight. The Confederacy began in the Alabama State Capitol Senate chambers in 1861 under Jefferson Davis, who believed that slavery was protected by the Constitution. A century later, in 1965, the Voting Rights March from Selma to Montgomery culminated on these same Capitol steps, a push for ballot access that continues today.
Some officials here believe redistricting is best left to the state, despite the disregard legislature showed to federal court orders. Alabama GOP Chairman John Wall still sees the 2021 map as legitimate.
Do you have any concerns at all that the district before was disenfranchising to people?
I don't, because I genuinely believe that what we should do as a society is look at people as individuals and stand for individual liberty, individual rights, for civil rights, and that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with unalienable rights. And if we look at people as individuals and not based on the color of their skin, it doesn't matter what the percentage of any race is in a district, because we're looking at each person as important.
Justice Brett Kavanaugh sought to specifically address that point, writing, "Redistricting requires in certain circumstances that courts account for the race of voters so as to prevent the cracking or packing, whether intentional or not." Legal defense fund lawyer Brittany Carter, who helped argue the case, says justices acknowledge voters in the state's Black Belt region being either cracked, unnecessarily divided among multiple districts, or packed into a single district to limit influence in other parts of the state.
You don't end up with Black people having virtually zero success of winning a statewide election, which is what the lower court found and what the Supreme Court acknowledged, by accident.
In a statement on X, Alabama Secretary of State Wes Allen says his office will facilitate the 2024 election cycle based on the map the federal court forced upon Alabama, but that more legal options remain. A trial before the same three-judge panel will take place in 2025, and voters say they'll be ready.
When I see something isn't right, I'm gonna find a solution to do something about it. I think that's like the core being of my life.
Reverend Sims says he's praying faith facilitates what's fair.
Whatever betide, God will take care of you. And that's the hope that we give to our congregants. That's the hope that we give to our communities and to our cities, that God is a providential God.
Hillary Powell, CBN News.
Thank you, Hillary. And still ahead, it happens every 4 years. No, not the presidential election. We are talking leap year right after this. Finally tonight, for most, birthdays come once a year. Not so for leap year babies, since February 29th only comes around every 4 years. Shelly Dean is one of them, a 23-year-old living in Seattle. She's celebrating with family for the first time in 8 years. And for those who are married on Leap Day, like Mary Pickering, time between anniversaries brings an opportunity for reflection.
It's a nice way of sort of really focusing on the relationship and especially, you know, what has changed in the interim.
Yeah, that's a good mindset for all of us on Leap Year. And we thank you for joining us this evening. Have a great night. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.